Okay, good evening. My name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing, and this is the information session for the affordable units at Sandy Pines in Plymouth. I'm going to hold on just a minute, see if we have any more households who join in at the last second here. I know several people from the development team were going to make themselves available to answer questions. Let me just type in here. Alex and Tyler, are you guys on the call? Can you hear me okay? And I should just start out by saying that this information session is really for anyone who's watching's benefit. Some of you will be tuning in live. This will also be available going forward, and households may catch this later. For households who are live, feel free to reach out at any time with any questions that you may have. Obviously, I'm the only one that can speak on video through YouTube, but you can type questions in the live chat box to the right of the screen where you see me and where you already probably see the little question and answer that we have. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the box, and if it's something that I'm going to get to a little later, I may ask you to wait, and I'll just cover it at the time that makes sense. Or if not, I'll stop and answer the question. So let's get started. So again, purpose of tonight is to just give you some information about what this opportunity is, how to apply, what the application process will look like, and what to kind of expect going forward. And I would recommend too, if you're watching this and you're interested in this opportunity, if you haven't already, Sandy Pines has a very nice website. I'd encourage you to take a look at their website. You can look at through the gallery. There's some very nice photos, and you can see some of the details of the units. In addition, let me tell you that in total, this development will have 30 residential homeownership units, and these will be divided between 18 single-family homes and 12 duplex units. Now, 18 of those units will be sold at market rate, 20 of those units will be sold at market rate, and the other 10 will be made affordable. And those are the units that we're discussing here, and that this opportunity applies to. Of those affordable units, they have a range of sizes. They range from about 1,300 square feet to a little over 1,600 square feet of living space. They all have 1.5 bathrooms. They have driveways, unfinished basements, vinyl siding and shutters, double hung windows, white cabinets in the kitchens and bathrooms, granite countertops, in-unit laundry, large closets, and much more. And this development is on a tree-lined street. There's a community green space and a park, so it's going to have a very nice residential feel. But again, if you're interested, highly encourage you to take a look through the website so you can look at the gallery of photos and get some additional details. So these affordable units, as I mentioned, there will be 6 duplex units, and the sales price on those is going to be $288,000. The monthly HOA fees are $42 a month. Those duplex units consist of 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms. They have 2 parking spots. And they are going to be available to households making up to 80% of the area median income. In addition, there are 4 single-family affordable units. The sales price on those are $320,700. They have the same HOA fees, so those will be $42 a month. The single-family homes consist of 3 bedrooms. They have 1.5 bathrooms, 2 parking spaces, and the square footage is a little over 1,600 or 1,632 square feet. The HOA fees cover the costs of common maintenance, so things like the park and also things like accounting and legal fees and reserves and insurance. Now, more generally, what does affordable housing and these units, what are we talking about here? We're not talking about subsidized housing. We're talking about beautiful brand new units in a development that has also a number of market rate units. And the affordable units will be very similar to the market rate units and indistinguishable from the exterior. The affordable units are made available pursuant to a program to encourage affordable housing in the state of Massachusetts, and they're available to households who meet the requirements of this program. But again, they're not subsidized, so households, while they do have to be eligible for the program, part of that eligibility hinges around being able to get a mortgage commitment, which will necessarily hinge around having sufficient income and assets that a bank would be able and willing to give you a loan. So it's called affordable housing. One might say that workforce housing is perhaps a more accurate descriptor. But at the end of the day, these units will be beautiful brand new units, and they'll be available to households who qualify at a price that's reduced from what it is for the market rate units in this development. So let's talk a little bit about the general eligibility requirements for this program. So everyone in the household must be a first-time home buyer. And we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that means in a few moments. The entire household's income and assets have to qualify and be below the income and asset limits that govern this program. As I just mentioned a moment ago, households need to be pre-approved for a mortgage. And finally, households cannot have a financial interest in the development. I don't believe that's something that comes up very often. What does sometimes come up is that a household who may be interested in an affordable opportunity is related to someone on, if it's a rental development, maybe they're related to the developer or the management team, or in a home ownership development, they may be related to someone who's part of the ownership or building team. In this case, it's Thorndike Development and Rebuildex. So unfortunately, if you're interested in this opportunity, but you happen to know one of the builders or someone who has an ownership interest in this development, that would be a disqualifying factor. And there's a question on the application to that end. Again, I don't think this is something that comes up often, but if it does, then you would need to disclose that in your application. So let's talk about the first kind of major point of eligibility, which is that households have to qualify under the income and asset parameters that govern this program. The income limits that govern are based on the household size. Okay, they're based on the household size. They're not based on the unit size that you're applying for. I'm going to run through what those income limits are. You don't have to memorize these or write them down. They are listed throughout the information packet and the application and the ad and on our website. By the way, if you haven't been to our website, I would encourage you to do so. That's www.sebhousing.com. And you can find the Sandy Pines link on there with the information packet, with the application, with the sample deed rider. You can download it if you please and fill it out if you're interested. So let's talk about the income limits, and I'll just kind of go through quickly here because, again, these are listed in various places. For a household size of 1, it's $67,400. For a household size of 2, it's $77,000. For a household size of 3, it's $86,650. Household size of 4, it's $96,250. For a household size of 5, it's $103,950. For a household size of 6, it's $111,650. Now, if you're wondering where those numbers come from, those are numbers that are published by HUD, the federal government, in the every year. So actually, we're still on the 2020 income limits. These are the numbers that I just went through are the numbers that HUD published in April of 2020. Those will change almost certainly in the next 3 weeks. They may go up, they may go down. In most years, they go up. This was not your average year. Things were obviously quite a bit different this year. I don't know, frankly, what's going to happen in April. It's possible that they could go down. If they do, we would request that they be kept where they are. We want to increase the pool of eligible applicants. We want to keep the income limits as high as we can, because that brings in more households or creates more opportunity for eligibility to be under the income limit. Obviously, if the income limits go up, great. Those will become effective immediately, and we will update the materials as soon as we have that information. And just going back for a second, I know I had listed at the outset what the affordable sales prices were, and I think it's just worth mentioning that sales prices are set according to a formula that this program requires that we use. But that formula uses the sort of a hypothetical applicant making up to the income limit using the number of bedrooms plus one. You don't need to know that formula. You don't need to get bogged down in what that is. But I think the relevance is that those sales prices are the sales prices, and they don't change based on any particular applicant's financial picture. So if you're making, $15,000 less than the applicable household size income limit, that doesn't mean that the sales prices would go down for you. And similarly, another household who has the same number of household members applying who maybe makes $10,000 more, well, the price wouldn't be higher for them. The price is the price, and that doesn't change based on any applicant's financial circumstances. Now, income in this program is defined rather expansively. And so if you're interested, and we hope you are, fill out an application. I recommend that you get started sooner rather than later, because if you submit it and anything's incomplete, you'll have another opportunity. You can fix it. We'll work with you to get you through the process. But you'll see in our application that income, there are various sources of income, and that probably comes as no surprise, but it's also true that many people think of their income as the money that they make at their job and may not consider other sources of income that they have that maybe they don't always think of as income. And so we've tried to sort of help anyone interested by listing some of those things that often come up. So when you fill out the application, look through the income table carefully so that you don't omit or neglect to mention something that's going to show up later. And just to give you some examples, so you have the income that you may make at your job, but you also may be self-employed, maybe in addition to, right? I mean, maybe you have your daytime job and then you're self-employed, you have a little side business at night or on weekends. That's great, but that also counts as income. And if you are able to move forward at some point, you would need to fill out a profit and loss statement showing what your income from that self-employment job is. Other sources of potential income can include things like child support or alimony, or Social Security income, or Social Security disability income, or if you have a pension that you're actively drawing from, that counts as income. Unemployment. Now, unemployment includes regular state unemployment. It does not include any of the federal pandemic unemployment. So that stuff we do not count. But your regular state-run unemployment compensation, that does count as income in this program. Another one that actually comes up with some frequency is like periodic payments or gifts from friends or family members. And if that applies, if you have that's great, but that does count as income. Now, it would have to be kind of regular in order for it to count as income. So, a one-time thing isn't going to count, but if it's every month or every 2 weeks, then it would count. Additionally, a household may have assets, and those assets may generate income. And so, typically, your savings account at your bank isn't generating much of anything, but maybe you have, another type of asset that does get you a little bit of a higher return, and that we would need to include towards the income limit. The income limits are your gross income. Okay, it's the gross income for W-2 households. Now, for households who are self-employed, as you'll see when you fill out the profit and loss statement, that actually, the way we calculate income there is a little bit more akin to net income, because we do take out your operating expenses. We do take those into account, and it's the bottom line number that we're looking at. So if you do have your own business, then you do get to deduct those costs. You have to show, obviously, you have to show them and show receipts and stuff. But if you have those, we can take those out, and it's for self-employed households, it's really more your net income that we're looking at. But for other households, if you have an employer, it's the gross income that we are looking at towards the income limits. Income includes all members of the household, with the exception of minor dependents. So if you have a 16-year-old kid who would be on the application with you, we are not counting their income. And in addition, full-time students who are dependents, we only count up to $480 of their income. Seems like kind of a weird random number, but that's the number. So if you have a 20-year-old kid who's a full-time student and who works on the side and they make $10,000 a year, that's great. We're only counting $480 of that. In general, the way we count income is a projection of what you're likely to make over the next 12 months. Obviously, there is some inherent uncertainty in that calculation, but it reflects largely what you have been making, because what you have been making is the best predictor that we have of what you will be making going forward. And so that's why we request and are required to look at things like your most recent pay stubs, so we can get a sense of what you've been making. So that's kind of, we could probably sit and talk about income at length. Everyone's income situation is different. I don't know that getting into all the weeds on income is necessarily beneficial, because most people will have different questions depending on what their particular income sources are. If you have specific questions about your income, you can always reach out to us, and we'll work through it with you. But again, for now, I would encourage you, start by taking a look through the information packet where we describe how income gets counted and what counts in detail. And if you should apply, and we hope you do, take a good look at the income table in the application, because again, it will list a lot of the different sources of income that frequently come up, that we frequently see. Now, in addition to having to be under the income limits, households also have to be under the asset limits. Assets for the applying household cannot exceed $75,000. And assets include many things, same as income. Now, it doesn't include personal tangible items. So, if you have an expensive jewelry collection or an expensive car or an inexpensive car, it doesn't really matter. Collections of sorts, we are not tracking down those things. We're not looking at those things. But we are looking at bank account statements your most recent bank account statements, checking accounts, savings accounts, if you have those. If you have a trust account, that happens sometimes. We need to see the trust documents. If you have a retirement account, this one always, is a little surprising because people tend to think, why should my retirement account count towards the asset limit? And I totally get that, because you're probably not planning on touching it for a while, depending on how old you are. Nevertheless, even if you don't plan on touching it, and even if there is a penalty for touching it, the reality is you could in fact get it if you wanted to. Now there might be a penalty, and so we would take that into account, but it would be the net cash value of that retirement account that we have to count. And you'd want to get a letter from the institution that manages it to say what that net cash value is, what the penalty is, and what the value is to you if you were to early withdraw it. Again, I know that often strikes households as surprising and maybe even a little bit unfair, but that is what the program requires. So you would need to include the net cash value of your retirement accounts. And you could also have, ownership of you could have mutual funds or stocks or bonds or various other assets. So you want to include them all. And again, just like for income, take a look through the asset table in the application so you don't, mistakenly overlook an asset that you may have. Again, assets also count down payment. I get this question with some frequency. Households say, well, I got $200,000, but I'm going to use 150 of it towards a down payment, so that doesn't count. So I have 50, and unfortunately, I have to say no. That does count. Okay, that does count. And that doesn't. And so if that's your money that you're using as a down payment, that counts. And it also counts if it's someone else's money. If you're going to get a loan, if a friend or a family member is going to give you money for down payment assistance, that also counts towards the asset limit. And then the biggest asset that people may own is a home. Okay, and the equity that you have in the home gets counted as well. Now, that kind of segues nicely into the next point, which is that point 2 of eligibility, which is that households cannot own a home upon move-in or in this to be eligible for this program. So, in general, everyone in the house has to be a first-time home buyer, which means you can't have owned a home within the preceding 3 years of application. Okay, you cannot have owned a home within the preceding 3 years of application, and that includes whether you owned it outright, whether you owned it jointly, whether you owned it in some other fashion. It all counts as ownership. There are exceptions to the first-time home buyer rule. Okay, so if you have had an ownership interest of a home within the past 3 years, you may qualify for one of the exceptions. Now, the 3 most common ones, and the ones that we sometimes see, are if you are a displaced homemaker. So that would be a household who worked in the home primarily without compensation. They owned a home with their partner, and they no longer own the home with the partner. They can own it, and I'm going to say in a second, you can own it at the time of application, but you can't own it at the time that you'd be moving forward after the lottery, and I'll touch on that in a bit. They also would have to be have effectuated the divorce from the spouse or partner who owns the home. Okay, because if you're only contemplating divorce but you haven't finalized it, then we also have to look at the spouse's income and assets. Okay, so displaced homemakers worked in the home without compensation. They owned a home with a partner. They no longer own the home that they own with the partner, and they're no longer married to the partner. Another one is for single parents. This one's pretty similar. So you fall into this exception if you own the home with your partner, no longer own it, you've finalized the divorce, and you are a parent of a child over whom you have custody. That can be joint custody, but you do have to have some type of custody over the child or be pregnant. The other one that probably comes up the most often is for age-qualified households. So this applies to households who are over age 55 or over. So if you're 55 plus and you own a home now, that's okay. You'd still need to sell the home, but you wouldn't be barred based on having owned it within the last 3 years. Okay, the other two exceptions almost never come up. You can read about them in the information packet. I don't think we ever see them, so I won't spend time talking about it here. But those are the three main exceptions to the first-time home buyer rule, which again is you can't have owned a home within the preceding 3 years. Now, again, in any of those instances, whether you are a displaced homemaker or a single parent or an age-qualified household, that merely means that you wouldn't be barred by mere virtue of the fact that you've owned a home in the past 3 years. You do still need to sell the home in order to buy a home here. Okay, so you can't own two homes in this program. You would need to have your home under purchase and sale at the time you're invited to move forward after the lottery. So if you own it right this moment and you want to apply, that's okay. Okay, that's okay. But once we run the lottery, and if you're invited to move forward in this process, and the first step would be to reserve one of the homes at Sandy Pines, you would need to at least have your house under purchase and sale. And that's because we would need to see that so we can tell what your assets are from the home, what equity you have, how much you stand to gain. Okay? So let's move on a little bit now to applying and household size and composition, and talking a little bit about the lottery. When you fill out your application, you can choose either or both of the bedroom sizes that are available here. So and there's actually no downside to being more inclusive. So if you think that you could be interested in either a 2 or a 3 bedroom, you should apply for both, because there's really no downside to doing so. And really the only kind of thing that could come out of it is maybe you're on one of the waiting lists and you elect, you decide that that's not the unit that you're interested in and you pass on it, and that's okay. But that's much easier to do than not applying for a bedroom size and then later changing your mind, because at that point you won't have taken advantage of your status as a lottery household in the line for the bedroom size that you're now interested in. So again, point is, there's really not much downside at all of applying for both if you think you could be interested in either of a 2 or a 3 bedroom unit. And so I'd encourage you to be sort of more expansive in your selection rather than less. In this program, we do have to give priority for units based on household type, which basically corresponds to how many bedrooms the program thinks that any particular household will need. So when you fill out your application, on one of the very first pages, it'll ask you what household type you are. So again, according to the program, a household type 3 is a household who needs 3 bedrooms. A household type 2 is a household who needs 2 bedrooms. And a household type 1 is a household who needs only 1 bedroom. The relevance of this is that when we do the lottery, we have to sort the results according to preferences. And one of the preferences is your household type. And for larger bedroom sizes, which both of, in this case, we're dealing with 2 and 3 bedrooms, we will have to give priority for the larger household types. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when I talk about the lottery. So, there are various compositions that can make up a type 3 household. There are various household compositions that can make up a type 2 household. And there are several household compositions that can make up a type 1 household. It's all pretty self-explanatory. Just check off the box that applies to you. And then again, in a moment when we talk about the lottery and creating the waiting list, you'll understand kind of a little bit more about the relevance of the household type. Now, when you submit your lottery application, you're not required to submit all of the supporting income and asset documentation that will ultimately be required to qualify you for this program. We'd love to take you at your word when you just fill out, here's what my income is, here's what my assets are. We're not allowed to do that. We have to see the proof, okay? So we have to see bank statements and pay stubs and W-2s and 1099s and your 3 most recent tax returns. We need to see a lot of stuff. It's really actually kind of equivalent to if you're getting a loan from a bank. They want to see a lot of income and asset documentation. We're asking for a lot of that same stuff, not because we're trying to make this difficult or burdensome, but because that's what the program requires. And this is obviously a great opportunity to buy a brand new home at a reduced price, and it should be made available to households who qualify for it. And the only way to really be certain that households qualify for it is to look at the documents that show what their income and assets are. Okay, so you won't be required to submit all of that with your lottery application. But later, after the lottery, if you're invited to move forward, you will be. Now, if you're eligible for the lottery, you will get a lottery application number, a letter, and it has your lottery application number, and that's just an anonymous identifier to be used in the lottery. It doesn't have any bearing on when you'll move forward or, kind of what number, what your number is. That doesn't really have any significance. It's just to keep your name and information anonymous. But in addition to that letter, which, by the way, please read carefully, okay, make sure that everything on there is accurate and comports with what you thought. In addition to that lottery number letter that we'll send you, we'll also send you a documents requirements guide. And the documents requirements guide is to prepare you for the documentation that you will be required to submit after the lottery if you are invited to move forward. I highly, highly recommend that you take a good look through that guide and begin to start collecting those documents. Because if you're invited to move forward after the lottery, there will be a time limit, and it'll probably be about 10 days, maybe a little longer, in order to get all of that documentation into us. And if you haven't begun to assemble those things and put them all together, it may prove difficult for you to get them all in the time limits that you have. And that would be a shame if you were to lose your waiting list position in the lottery because you couldn't get all of those documents together. So when you get the documents requirements guide, again, highly recommend that you spend some time looking through it and begin to collect all of that documentation so that if or when you're invited to move forward after the lottery, you'll have the file ready and you can just submit it to SEB and say, hey, here's everything, and it'll hopefully be easy, okay? To get into the lottery, I mentioned you have to fill out an application. You don't have to submit all of the income and asset documentation, but you do need to submit a mortgage pre-approval. Okay, you do need to submit a mortgage pre-approval that will, in combination with your assets, shows that you'll be able to afford one of these units. Now, there are some mortgage standards applicable to this program that are pretty unique and maybe different than if you were just, buying a home that didn't have these, that wasn't part of this program. We've laid out in the information packet with a whole page on the mortgage standards. I highly recommend that you go to a lender who's familiar with the affordable housing programs in Massachusetts, and B, that you bring this page with you. Okay, literally make a copy of it, rip it out of the info pack, grab a second copy, do whatever you need to do. But I would highly recommend that you bring this page when you go to get your pre-approval and you show it to the bank and you say, I'm interested in a loan. Here are the requirements. Do you have a product that meets these requirements? Because, ultimately, the bank's going to find out about some of the requirements and some of the restrictions that are in place. It's obviously better that they know up front so that they can give you an accurate assessment of whether they have a product that meets your needs, rather than saying, yes, we pre-approve you, and then later on down the road when you're trying to move forward and buy the home, they say, actually, sorry, we weren't aware of such and such, and actually we can't give you a loan. So bring that page with you. We've also listed in that page, there's a website where you can go to find lenders who are familiar with this program and who have products that are great for this program. So you can look there too. I think you can search by area codes. You can find a lender that's within your area. But takeaway here is bring this page with you when you go to apply for pre-approval, and definitely advantageous to use a bank who's familiar with this program so that they don't promise you something and then have to back out later. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about some of the eligibility requirements, right? We've talked about you have to be under the income limits, you have to be under the asset limits, you can't have owned a home within the last 3 years unless you meet one of the exceptions. Even for households who meet one of the exceptions, they will ultimately have to sell the home before they can purchase a unit at Sandy Pines. We've talked about how you fill out your application, try and get it in earlier rather than later so that if anything's missing, you have time to get it. If you're eligible, we've talked about how, take a good look at the documents requirements guide so that you can start to collect the documents that will be required. We've talked a little bit about household type and how when you fill out your application, just list the household type that you are. Okay, and so I think we've covered those points. And so I think the next point to talk about, and sorry, we've also talked about the mortgage pre-approval standards. So let's just talk a little bit about the lottery and what that's going to look like. So for all households who are eligible for the lottery, this lottery is going to be conducted in much the same way we're doing this information session. So we're all still virtual. And these lotteries work a little bit differently than what most people think of when they think about a lottery. Typically, when people think of a lottery, they think winners, losers. Some people get picked, some people get selected, some people lose. These are some of the kind of common terms you hear. And understandably, because oftentimes that's how lotteries work. But in these lotteries, it's different because every household who's eligible for the lottery will be selected, okay? And every household who's selected will be on a waiting list. So there aren't any winners and there aren't any losers. There's just every household's in the lottery, every household gets picked, and every household has a position on a waiting list. And the waiting lists are what we use to determine the order of priority in moving forward in the next step in this process. And the next step is when you kind of enter the typical process of buying a home, which is to reserve the home of your choice and then sign a purchase and sale agreement and then get a mortgage commitment and ultimately close on the unit. But so the waiting list established this order of priority that households will get to engage in that next step. And actually, in this lottery, it'll be relatively straightforward. Sometimes we do lotteries, there can be as many as 15 different waiting lists. But in this lottery, there are only going to be two. There's going to be a waiting list for the 2-bedroom units, and there'll be a waiting list for the 3-bedroom units. Okay, and if you apply and are eligible for both, you'll be on both. And if you only apply for one and are eligible for that one, you'll be on that waiting list. Now, there are 6 2-bedroom units. And I know I talked a little bit about household types, so let me just flesh that out for you now. So when we do the lottery drawing, I then have to rank the results according to the priorities to create the waiting list. The top tier on the 2-bedroom list will be all type 2 and 3 households. They have equal priority. And the bottom tier will be type 1 households. And that's exactly how we'll create those waiting lists. And so what that means is if, for example, if you're a single person, you're a type 1 household applying for this opportunity, you're the very first person picked in the lottery, you're not going to be at the top of a waiting list because every type 2 and type 3 household is going to be ahead of you. And that's because, as I mentioned, we have to give priority to households who the program says need the number of bedrooms in the unit. And the type 1 household doesn't need 2 bedrooms. They might like 2 bedrooms. They don't need 2 bedrooms. The 3-bedroom units will be similar, but a little bit different. There are 4 of those. The top tier is just type 3 households. So type 3 households, the second tier will be type 2 households, and the bottom tier will be type 1 households. So similar example, but if you're a type 2 household applying for a 3-bedroom unit, and you're the very first household picked in the lottery, you're going to be behind any type 3 households who also applied for a 3-bedroom unit. Okay, so now if you're a type 2 household and you applied for a 2-bedroom unit and you're the very first household picked, then you're going to be number 1 on the 2-bedroom list. Okay, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning too, but and this kind of ties in with what I'm about to say, but the households on the waiting list will get to move forward in the order established on the waiting list. Okay, so the first household on the 2-bedroom waiting list, when they are deemed fully eligible for the program, right, because they'll have to submit all the income and asset documentation after the lottery. But once we've said, yes, you're eligible, you then move forward in the next step in the process, which is to engage with the sales team in selecting the unit of your choice. Now, you're not locked into a specific unit, okay? So it's not as though, the number 1 household gets unit 100 and the number 2 household gets, a unit 105 and the next household gets unit 110, like you have no choice over the matter. That's not how this works. Rather, if you're the number 1 household on the 2-bedroom list, you're going to get to choose from any of the 6 2-bedroom units, whether it's the unit that's ready right, in 2 weeks from then, or 2 months from then, or 4 months from then. And I think these units are, if I recall, their delivery is a little bit staggered. So they're probably not going to be ready all at exactly the same time. You may want more time, or maybe there's just a unit that if your heart's set on, or a particular place within the development that really suits you. And that's the benefit of being the number 1 household on a waiting list, is you get to choose from any of the available units. Once you've reserved that unit, then the next household on that list gets to choose from any of the remaining 5 2-bedroom units, and the next household from any of the remaining 4 2-bedroom units, and so on and so forth until they've all been sold. Same applies for the 3-bedroom units. And the point I was going to make is that these units have all been selected and approved. Okay, they've all been selected and approved by both the town of Plymouth and by the state. Okay, and so they've been approved to make sure that they're evenly distributed throughout the development. They're not all clustered together. They're not identifiable as the affordable units out from the outside. There's nothing to indicate that one particular unit's an affordable unit and one's a market rate unit. So you can hopefully take some comfort in the fact that these have been approved by both the town and the state to make sure that they're equitable and even and dispersed throughout the development, and also that they come in a, that 6 of them are 2-bedroom units and 4 of them are 3-bedroom units, which so they have a good range of options. If you do move forward, and we just talked about how you can select from the available units, at that point, additional players get involved, okay? Because up until this point, you're mostly or almost exclusively interacting with SEB Housing to submit your application and engage in the lottery process. And we're telling you, what documents are necessary to submit and all that stuff. But after the lottery, we would then turn you over to the sales team to engage in the home buying process with them. Because again, we're not the developer. We will be kind of peripherally involved in that process, but we're not the ones on site showing units, and we're not taking deposits or drafting purchase and sales agreements or signing the purchase and sales agreements. We don't have any control over, the dates of these things. So that all gets worked out between the affordable buyer and the sales team. And so, again, point is, it's not something you need to kind of worry about now. Just to kind of be aware that after the lottery, there will be additional people for households who are moving forward who engage in this process, members of the development team who will work with you to find dates to reserve a unit and show you the available units and work with you to sign a purchase and sale agreement and all the steps that go into buying a home. There will be time limits very likely to do some of those things, and again, not something you need to worry about now, but typically after the lottery, if you're moving forward, and we'll release households to the sales team one at a time, right? So the top household on a waiting list will be given notice, hey, it's your turn to move forward. We'll give you the contact information for the sales team. We'll give the sales team your contact information so that you can begin to work together in this process. And you'll probably have some time limits, as any buyer would, for meeting the next steps in the process. So usually it's about 5 days to reserve the unit of your choice, and then you can you'll work with the sales team to determine how many days you'll have to sign a purchase and sale agreement, and then that purchase and sale agreement will dictate when you have to get mortgage financing by them, and we'll also set the closing date. Again, SEB will be involved. That's primarily because households do have to maintain program eligibility all the way up through closing. And so there will be this second review that needs to be done approximately a month before a household closes. It's really mostly an update of your file just to make sure that household's financial picture has not changed substantially from the time that we ran the lottery, if there's to the time that they're going to close on a unit, right? So if you're eligible at the time of the lottery, that's great. And then if you reserve and are going to close on a unit that's available in 7 months later, and in the interim your income goes up by $25,000, that may be great, but it could kick you over the income limit, and you have to remain income and asset eligible all the way up through closing. So we are required to do this second review about a month before you close, and that's why we kind of stay involved. So tracking the dates of your purchase and sale and closing, so we know when that second review is required. But again, other than that, those dates for reserving a unit and signing the purchase and sale and closing, those are between you and the development team or their sales team. I want to close by talking a little bit about these units and sort of down the road. All of these units will have a deed rider that has a number of restrictions articulated, and we have the deed rider on our website. You can take a look at the full thing if you want. We also describe its kind of most salient provisions in the back of the information packet. This home does need to be your primary residence. It's not like your income generating property that you rent out. It's got to be your principal residence. And it's also, you can expect maybe to be able to resell this in the future if and when you do, for some increase in value, but it's limited. Okay, it's limited. So if anyone's watching this and thinking, I can buy one of these units for, $288,000, and then I'm going to turn around and sell it on the market for, its market rate value, that's not how this program works. These units are set aside to be affordable in perpetuity. So if and when you were to go to sell the unit, you have to sell it to another affordable buyer, and you have to sell it according to a formula that determines the resale price. I can't tell you exactly what that price would be because it changes year to year. It's a modest increase. You can expect to sell it for more than what you bought it for. But again, this is not like an opportunity where you get to just go sell it on the market rate and make a bundle. Okay, you sell it to another affordable buyer at a price determined by a formula. And again, I can't tell you exactly what that is. It'll depend how long you own it and how the HUD numbers change in future years. I should add as well that the state is involved in that process and will help lead you through it. So, they're involved in finding another affordable buyer and qualifying that person. So you don't need to worry like, hey, how do I find another buyer and make sure that they're eligible? You're not required to do that. You're just required to let the state know that you are interested in selling, and they will kind of walk you through that process and help find someone else who's also an affordable buyer. I should note as well, there are restrictions around capital improvements. Okay, you have to get approval for those from the state, and those are usually necessary things, like if your water heater breaks, unlikely because it's new construction, or your roof needs repairing or some structural issue. Again, brand new construction, unlikely, but maybe if you own it for a long time, something happens. In that case, you need to get approval from the state, and then the value or the amount that you spend making that capital improvement could be added to the resale price, so you can recapture some of that. But other things that are just upgrades that aren't necessary, kind of structural things or necessary things, just things that you might like, those you do not necessarily get to count as capital improvements, and you do not get to recoup those in the resale price. Okay, so just as an example, if you said, hey, I want to upgrade to this, or I want to add a deck, or I want to add a garage, okay, you could do that, but the price, the amount that you spend on that, isn't going to get added to the value of the home and then factored in when you sell the unit later on. Okay, so you'll be there for your own enjoyment, but it won't. The price of it won't get factored in upon resale down the road. All right, I think I've covered most of the points I wanted to touch on. Again, I think I'll just leave you with, if you're interested in this opportunity, it's a wonderful opportunity. Get your application in sooner rather than later. If you have questions, and oftentimes people don't know what their questions are exactly until they start really digging in and reading through the information packet and filling out the application, that's totally fine. You can reach out to us, you can call us, you can email us, and we'll be happy to walk you through it. And we hope you apply, and we hope to see your application soon. And Alex, Tyler, Buzz, thanks for joining. I don't know if you're still here. This video will stay up for households who may view it going forward. If there are development specific questions, I'll let you know. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for households who are watching, and I hope everyone has a great night. Good night.